Imagine this. You're 26 years old. 3 days ago, you watched your husband die defending your city walls against Spartan warriors. Now you're standing in the ruins of your home, holding your 3 children close, trying to make yourself invisible as Spartan officers walk among the surviving women, examining you like livestock at a market. An officer approaches. He asks your age, whether the children are yours. You answer, your voice barely a whisper. He makes a mark on his wax tablet and moves on without explanation. That evening, soldiers tear your children from your arms. Your 3-year-old son screams for you, trying to run after you as you're marched away with 200 other women. You look back, trying to memorize their faces, having no idea if you'll ever see them again. This is where your nightmare begins, and compared to what's coming, death would have been mercy. This is Crown and Dagger, where we explore the darkest chapters of history that others won't touch. What you're about to learn will change how you understand ancient warfare and why the wives of defeated warriors faced fates that ancient sources called worse than death. Hit subscribe and smash that like button right now, because this story needs to be told. To understand what happened to these women, you need to understand what Sparta actually was. While Athens built democracy and traded culture across the Mediterranean, committing its own atrocities behind that civilized mask, Sparta was brutally honest about what it was: a war machine. Boys taken at age 7, trained in the agoge, pain, obedience, violence, weak infants left to die, individual identity crushed. You were Spartan first, human second. But here's the foundation of it all. The Helots, a massive enslaved population, 10 Helots for every Spartan. They worked the land while Spartans perfected warfare. The Spartans lived in constant terror of them, outnumbered 10 to 1. One rebellion away from annihilation. This fear drove everything they did, and Sparta understood something other Greeks didn't fully grasp. To destroy an enemy forever, killing warriors isn't enough. You target their women, control reproduction, erase identity. Make the next generation serve you instead of seeking revenge. When Sparta conquered a city, this wasn't random violence. This was systematic. Commanders assessed captured women like inventory, age, fertility, status, then sorted them into categories based on how they'd be used. Field slaves, domestic servants, and for the youngest, healthiest women. Something historians like Plutarch described with words suggesting it was worse than death itself. Now let me tell you exactly what that meant. Here's what most people don't understand about ancient warfare. The battle was just the beginning. The real conquest happened afterward, in how you dealt with the survivors. Kill all the men? You've eliminated one generation of warriors, but their sons, raised by their mothers, would grow up seeking revenge. The culture survives. The grievance festers. In 20 years, you're fighting the same war again. Sparta figured out the solution. You don't just conquer territory, you conquer bloodlines. When Spartan forces took a city, the surviving population was immediately divided. Military-age men were either dead or being marched to execution. Boys and elderly were separated, and the women, specifically women of childbearing age, roughly 15 to 40, they received special attention. These women represented both a threat and an opportunity. Left alone, they'd raise the next generation of enemies. But controlled properly, they could be absorbed, their children could become Spartans, or at least serve Spartan interests. The conquered culture could be erased not through genocide, but through systematic reproductive control. The assessment process was methodical. Spartan officers examined each woman. How old? Any children? What was her status in the conquered city? Wife of a warrior? Daughter of a leader? A priestess? Each detail determined her fate. The women were then categorized. Some would join the Helot masses, disappearing into fields and workshops. Others had different destinies. And for women from the ruling class, wives and daughters of the enemy's leaders, Sparta had specific plans. Because humiliating the enemy's elite women wasn't just cruelty. It was strategic messaging. It told every Greek city watching, "This is what happens when you resist us, not just to your men, to your women, to your bloodline, to everything you are." The wives and daughters of defeated nobles were valuable, not as labourers. Sparta had helots for that. They were valuable as symbols, as living demonstrations of total conquest. These women would be assigned as wives to Spartan citizens, not by choice, not through negotiation, by state decree, older Spartan men who needed wives. Warriors whose previous wives had died. Men who hadn't produced enough children for the state. The assignments were practical, serving Sparta's need to maintain its citizen population. But they were also psychological warfare. Picture this: your husband was a city leader, a respected warrior. 3 weeks ago he commanded men in battle. Now he's dead, killed by Spartans. And you're standing in a ceremony, dressed in wedding garments, being formally married to one of the men who destroyed your world. These weren't secret arrangements, they were public. Everyone present knew exactly what this was. Conquest dressed as marriage. You'd speak the ritual words, play the role of a willing bride, while every person watching understood you were a captive, whose real husband was probably rotting in a mass grave. After the ceremony, you'd be taken to your new husband's household. There you'd be expected to fulfill every duty of a Spartan wife, managing the home, bearing children, raising those children as Spartans, teaching them Spartan values, watching them grow up to potentially fight against any survivors from your original city. The children you bore would be considered Spartan citizens, but they'd always carry the knowledge of their mother's origin. Some grew up never learning about their maternal heritage. Others knew but couldn't act on it. All of them existed as living proof that Sparta could take even the highest-ranking women and make them serve the state that had destroyed their families. For the women, this was described by ancient sources as worse than death because it required active participation in destroying your own culture. You couldn't just endure, you had to perform, smile, manage a household, love children who were both yours and products of your captivity. Some women adapted, found ways to survive psychologically, others never did. Ancient accounts mention women who lived their entire lives in silent grief, who refused to fully participate even when it brought punishment, who taught their children small rebellions in secret, and some chose death. Plutarch describes captured noble women throwing themselves from cliffs rather than accept forced marriage to their conquerors. These deaths were sometimes portrayed as virtuous, women preserving their honour through suicide. But the fact that such choices were necessary reveals the horror of the system. Now we get into something even darker, because forced marriage to citizens wasn't the only fate awaiting captured women. Sparta's ideology emphasized producing strong warriors. They practiced selective breeding in their own population, and they extended this thinking to conquered peoples. Some captured women, particularly those from populations Spartans considered to have desirable traits, height, strength, specific physical characteristics, were assigned not as wives but as what sources obliquely call breeding partners. These weren't marriages. These were reproductive assignments. Women paired with Spartan men specifically to produce children with mixed heritage but Spartan loyalty. Or paired with helots to produce offspring born into slavery but with characteristics valuable for specific labour. The arrangements treated both women and sometimes men as breeding stock, value determined entirely by potential offspring. The women had no legal protection, no status, no ability to refuse. Children born from these unions occupied complicated positions. Some might be considered citizens, but always carried the taint of mixed heritage. Others were born helots, inheriting their mother's subjugated status, growing up knowing they were products of conquest. For the mothers, this created profound psychological conflict. The children were theirs. Maternal attachment is powerful. But they were also products of arrangements the mothers never chose. growing up to serve the people who had destroyed everything. This wasn't random violence. This was state policy. The targeting of women for reproductive purposes was as carefully planned as military campaigns. The results? Children who would serve Spartan interests were intended outcomes supporting Sparta's long-term dominance. Most captured women faced a simpler but no less brutal fate. They became Helots,